Hi, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the books I read in February, and I'm excited to share these with you. There's a few really good ones that I loved. So if you are new to my channel, I created this channel as a homeschooling resource to give you different organizational ideas, curriculum ideas, and ways to invite Christ into your homeschool space. So if you're interested in those things, please hit that subscribe button and let's talk about some books. So I have 3 books that I'm going to share with you this month that I read, and I'm really excited to go through these with you. And just as a reminder, I have book reviews for all 3 of these on my blog. So I'll make sure that the blog post is linked down below so you can go check it out if you want to read the reviews. I might say some of the same things here, but then I expound a little bit more there probably. I think usually it's slightly different and stuff. So if you want a different perspective that I wrote at a different time, you can go check out those reviews on my blog post, and that will all be linked down below for you to go find. Okay, so the first book I have to mention, I read first, and it was my favorite. I loved it so much, and you guys are probably gonna laugh when you see what it is because you'll be like, why is that so exciting? But it's called The Secrets of Discipline, and it's 12 Keys for Raising Responsible Children. It is 20 years old, but I feel like it applies more today than it probably even did 20 years ago. I'm not really sure because I was, how old was I? 14 or something, I guess, 20 years ago. But I still feel like it's very applicable today. And if I were to write a parenting book ever, I have thought about it a few times, this would be the type of book I would write. As I read it, it was very weird how it describes so very well how I parent my kids. And so I really enjoyed this book. So it goes through and talks about how discipline 20 years ago, and it's also true today, talks more about managing choices. And that's the only part of discipline that we kind of give to kids, is just managing choices a little bit, but then we don't do anything else around that. It's like, oh, kids will be kids. We kind of use that excuse and that kind of thing to just let them get away with whatever. So it goes through and talks about these 3 building blocks here of discipline. So manage choices is one of them. It actually talks about that third though. It says train compliance and teach skills and then manage choices. So it's falling apart. Sorry, my book is falling apart. It's an old book, like I said. But all of those things it goes through and it talks about them. It gives some different examples, talks about what they mean. But some of the things that I learned the most from this book that reinforce things that I already do was when it talked about habits. So it uses a few analogies that I think were just so perfect. One of them is with a driver's ed teacher and just learning how to drive in general. It talks about coming up to a red light and why do you stop at a red light or a stop sign, all those types of things. Why do you do it? And it's because it's a habit. You're not doing it because you're getting to the light and you're like, oh, if I don't stop, do you think a car's gonna come through? But if I do stop and someone runs the light, then it'll save my life. You're not going through all those sorts of things when you're coming up to a red light. It's a habit for you to stop at a red light, which, is what you've been taught, like from driver's ed and all that stuff. If you do something wrong in the way you're not supposed to, they'll have you do it again and keep doing it again until you do it the right way. And you get this habit going on. And obviously, if you're driving in a new place, sometimes you're not as familiar with things. You don't have that habit to like stop at certain stop signs or something. So you might accidentally run a stop sign. Not saying that I've done that before. Just kidding, I totally have, but not on purpose. And thankfully, nothing bad happened. But when we kind of break that habit or routine, then we forget what we're supposed to do. So it talks about how these habits and routines have to be trained into children. And there are certain things that they should just be expected to listen to you because they are still children. The whole kids will be kids thing is completely false in the way that we describe it. So kids will be kids should be used to the fact that they still need parents. That's, kids are still kids. That's basically the idea. Like, they still need our help regardless of what age they are. And a lot of people nowadays just say, oh, well, they're making that huge mess because kids will be kids. Or they're running around naked without any clothes on because kids will be kids. And that's not true. Again, you have trained them to be that way. And you can train them to be a different way, just like we've been trained to follow the rules of the road. Or you can also, they use the analogy of a coach, like as you go through and you learn how to play a certain sport, if you're not doing it quite correctly or the form, like I had struggles with volleyball, I am right-handed, but left-eyed or whatever, which is unusual. And so my body is slightly, I was ambidextrous for a long time when I was a child. And so my body's a little bit wonky when it comes to footing. And so I threw balls weird. I'd throw with my right, but put my right foot forward, all these things. So the coach is trying to retrain me, and they'd have me do it again and again till I get it right. And that's how it should be with our kids as well, at least with certain things. And I could like ramble forever about this book because it was just that amazing. And there's so many times, honestly, when people ask me how my kids can behave so well, and they don't always behave well. That's a secret I'm just laying out there. They're still crazy kids and they still don't listen all the time. And I have to work at it constantly to help train them to do certain things. But one of the comments from a friend a couple years ago was, my kids, we eat dinner, they came over for dinner, we all had dinner together, and then right after dinner, my kids just went up the stairs and got ready for bed. And they just brushed their teeth, and she looked at me and she's like, how did you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, that's what we've always done. From the time they were super, super teeny, like they're still teeny, but when they were super, super teeny, that's what they've always done. They'd eat dinner, they don't go upstairs, they get ready for bed. So it's a routine that's established in them. We don't have to tell them anything, like stopping at a red light. When you see the red light, you just stop. You don't have to tell them, they just know that that's what they're supposed to do. And so I have several of those things with my kids, that just these routines that we've established. And in here it talks about how parents that have all these routines set up don't necessarily know how to explain to other people how they do it, which is exactly how I feel a lot of the time. I'm like, I don't know, it's just what we do. Like, when they eat dinner, they finish, they put their plate in the sink and the dishwasher. We're working on the dishwasher part, but they get up, they put their plate away. They don't just leave it on the table. All these different things that you teach them. And there's a few quotes I wanted to read. They're over here on my computer, but they're also on my blog post, so you can look at it some more. It talks about how no means no. That's a very short, like succinct quote, but I think it's very powerful that no means no, and your kids have to learn that. You might have to teach them over and over again and walk them through the steps. And it talks about having redos, like if your kids are being mean and say something mean, have them practice it again. And when I lived in China for 4 months and taught English over there, sorry, this book is gonna be like the longest review and then the other ones will be a little shorter, but I taught English over there, and the first few days are spent just establishing who's in charge, basically, because otherwise the kids will walk all over you. And so you have to walk from their Chinese classrooms to the English classrooms. And so you line them up, and if they're not listening, you go back and reline up and you do it again. And you keep doing that. And sometimes the whole hour of class is spent doing that. But then after that, the kids listen super well to you because they know that you're the authority and you have taught them what is the appropriate behavior. And so just having these kind of redos that, oh, how should we have said that? Like, that was an appropriate response. So how could we respond that would be an appropriate thing to say? And things like that. And then it said all those if-then statements should only be used when discussing the choices that really do belong to children. And so a lot of times we're like, if you do this, then you can have that. And it shouldn't be that way. It's just like, no, you're supposed to do this. Like, this is what you need to do. And sometimes I feel like it sounds like harsh parenting, but I don't think it is at all. And I've seen it work with my kids. Like, they're really good listeners. They know when mom talks that they need to listen. Again, it doesn't always work, right? It takes constant work to get them trained in these certain ways. And then you still give them choices within those things, but choices that are a kid's choice to make, because there's some choices that don't belong to children, and so we shouldn't be giving them to them anyway. And so just different things like that. Anyway, I could go on and on and on about this book, obviously. There's a few additional insights probably on my blog post, hopefully, I don't know. But then there's this book, and it's very short and very easy to read, and I think it is well worth a read. I would buy it used, though. I think on Amazon new it's like super expensive because it's an older book. So you could probably find it somewhere else. That's why mine's falling apart, because I bought it used. So that's what I would recommend. But this book is amazing. This is how I parent almost 100%, and it works very, very well. Okay, so the next book I read was An Unseen Angel, and this is about the Sandy Hook shooting, specifically about the Parker family. And this book has been on my list for a while, like on my list. It's been like in my brain wanting to read it, but still hesitant because it's sad. Like it's gonna be a sad book. But we lived in Connecticut, an hour away from Sandy Hook when this happened. And my husband actually remembers the day very vividly. I don't remember it as well. But we had just lived in Connecticut for a few months, and we had our oldest at the time, and he was almost 1. And they had gone out, him and our almost 1-year-old, to do some Christmas shopping, and he heard it on the radio. And so I remember him coming back and like telling me about it. And then for our church congregation covers area. It's not just you decide to go to a certain church building. And so some of the people in our church congregation went to this school as well. We didn't know them personally, but it affected our congregation as a whole. And Alyssa Parker is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is another reason I was drawn to this book, because she was we're a member of the same church. And this book it's super sad, but also just brings so much hope into my heart. I feel like hope in the ability for people to heal after tragedy, but then also just hope in humanity, because all the good she talks about a little bit, the book starts a little bit before everything happens, and just their life kind of leading up to it, them meeting, having kids, and him going through different schools, and then moving back east to Connecticut and everything, and how that all happened. And then talks about some other tragedies that happened in her life right before the shooting as well, where she lost her daughter. But as she goes through all of that, and then she talks about after, a big chunk of the book is focused on after. And just the amazing things people did just like touched my heart. And I'm not a huge crier, but the book I definitely cried more, and then the ending not as much, but it helped that I was like sitting by my family most of the time, because then I like can suck it up a little easier when I'm around other people. When I'm by myself, I just like, all the tears come out. So if you don't want to cry, sit by some more people. I'm just kidding. Maybe that doesn't help you, but it helps me. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But anyways, I just really, really loved how she talked about all the great things that people did for them. And it just, again, gives me so much hope in humanity, especially after this last year when life has just been so crazy and just a mess. There's so much good in people, and I love how she points that out. And she talked to the shooter's father and just went through, that forgiveness process of forgiving the shooter and everything. And I've actually read about him more. I can't remember what book it is in. I feel like it's in Screenwise. Again, I just mentioned Screenwise recently in another video. But if I remember and look it up, I'll post it down below what book it's in. But it talks more about him. And when I read that book, I very much related to the story of the shooter, because he was diagnosed with Asperger's, which now is just on the autism spectrum, which is what my son would have been diagnosed with if it was still a label that we gave and said he has autism. And so that situation is very this could have been my son. Just all the factors that contributed to this boy going to the school and shooting all these young children and some of the teachers and stuff. My child is very similar to him in so many ways. And so I related to that part of it as well. And just my heart went out to his family. And so I just felt like it was just such a good book. And there's one of the quotes that she ended with at the very end, because they didn't live in Connecticut for very long after they moved back to Oregon, which is where he had done some schooling and stuff, but she did some photography stuff. And I just thought this quote was really beautiful. She said, "Something I learned as a photographer supplies a useful analogy for how I have come to view the tragedy in my life. When we first moved to the Northwest, I learned to love overcast skies. I discovered that when clouds cover the sky, all the other colors of a landscape pop more vividly in my camera lens. The same principle is true in my own story. The clouds that have passed through my life have made the ordinary joys of existence more precious and more radiant. I take fewer things for granted. I am more grateful." And I just think that was so beautiful, that the clouds make everything more vibrant. Those difficulties in life, they help us see the joy more, even though they bring a lot of sorrow as well. We're better able to see the joy and see the good as well, and all the bright pops of color. And I just thought that was a beautiful way to, basically she ends the book with that, and I just thought it was so beautiful. So I would highly recommend this book. Again, it's not for the faint of heart. It is a difficult book. It could be a trigger book, but I just think it's very beautiful. And her whole story, their whole family story, is just absolutely amazing and inspiring. Okay, the last book I have to talk about is Never Split the Difference. And this was a fun book, actually. It was different than a lot of books I read, but it was actually a pretty easy read. Like, the pages are thick. Like, just so it looks like more pages than it is, but it's not really. And the words are pretty big, so it was actually a fairly quick read. And it's about, up here it just says, a former FBI top hostage negotiators field test tools for talking anyone into or out of just about anything. So, as it says, he was a FBI, like, huge top hostage negotiator. And so he's going through in here and just giving some key elements of that. And this book focuses a lot more on business stuff. And obviously I sort of have a business, I guess, but I'm not a negotiator or anything like that. I don't interact with very many people. I'm an introvert by nature and stuff. So those kinds of things didn't relate to me. Honestly, I'd love to see him write a book about relationships and like parenting. I feel like having that, just because all the examples are so business oriented, I feel like I could relate more if they were also parenting and I'd know how to use them. And so that's just, if you're listening out there, which you're probably not, but if Chris Voss is listening, make a parenting book, because I would love it. But this book was it was very eye-opening, I feel like, to the idea of negotiating. I haven't studied negotiating at all, really. And I just thought his insights were really great. So I just want to share a couple with you. The one that I loved the most was him talking about when you're negotiating, it's not about you, it's about them. And if you go in negotiating, which is what the previous approaches to negotiating were, and a lot of business models are also this way, it's about what you can get out of it, then you're probably gonna fail. Instead, if you focus on having empathy for the other person's situation, then you will probably find success. And empathy is not that you agree with what they're doing or anything. It's not sympathy, right? But it's being willing to understand where they're coming from, get their background, and just that you can see where they are at. You're meeting them where they're at and trying to understand their situation, why they're doing what they're doing. Because a lot of he talks about how it's just based in emotions. So many things, like everything we do is based in emotions. Like, we might use our brain to go through all the options, but ultimate decisions, a lot are just coming from our emotions. And so if you can show these people that you understand them, that you care about them, then a lot of times they're willing to listen and change their mind and stop whatever it is they're doing that you have to negotiate them out of anyway. And so he goes through some of his situations. So every chapter usually had some hostage negotiation story, which I thought was great. It kept the book entertaining. I don't know if I should say hostage negotiations are like entertaining, but it keeps it interesting, I guess. And then he'd talk about some sort of like business idea, how you could use it in a business situation, or he talked about how he used it to get this truck that he wanted, how he got them to talk the price down, and just all these different strategies that you can use. So I just thought that was really great. And I also love this because honestly, it made me think about Christ and just this idea of how he doesn't always agree with what we're doing and it's not always the right thing, but he's still willing to meet us where we are and then work up from there. And that's what he's basically saying, that we meet these people where they are, we understand their situation. It doesn't mean we agree with what they're doing, but we're willing to help them. And we see that they're in this position and we want to help them. So I just thought that was really beautiful. And then my like neon colored note cards over here. This is how I read books, especially this one because it's my husband's book. So I didn't want to write in it. So I have a note card to keep all my notes on. But he said, no deal is better than a bad deal. So if you just can't make a deal at all, like don't make a bad deal because it's better just to not have a deal in the first place. And then he also talks about how failures plant the seeds of future success, which I just thought was beautiful because I'm all about talking about failure and how it's how we actually grow and learn in life. And I love this one too. He said, negotiation, if I can talk, is not an active battle. It's a process of discovery. The goal is to uncover as much information as possible. And so I just thought the book was really cool. It was very different than what I normally read. It's given me some different ideas of like mirroring people, like when they talk and you mirror their last words and get them to speak more. You want them to feel like they're in control, and ways to say no without actually saying no, and how like using no is better than getting a yes, because a lot of times when people give yes, they're just doing it because they want you to stop talking and not because they actually are interested in what you're saying in any sort of way. So I just thought he had a lot of really, really good insights. I'm excited to like reflect on them more. And my husband has read this book too, so we were like joking around with each other. He was mirroring my emotions yesterday and we were just laughing. So then you can do funny things if you and your spouse read the book. So I really enjoyed this book and would just recommend it, especially if it's not a topic you'd normally read about. I feel like this is a good, like easy read for a variety of people. Okay, so those are all my books. Those are the 3 books that I read in February, besides, you know, the fluff books that are always on the list. And I really enjoyed all of them. I absolutely love the parenting one. I just thought all of them were really good books. Most of them they're all pretty quick reads. And I just really enjoyed them. So if you have book suggestions for me, please put them down in the comments below, because I love to hear all your guys' ideas. Some of the books I've loved have come from recommendations from you guys. So please keep them coming down below. And if you enjoy seeing these videos, please give me a thumbs up and I will see you next time.